The total crime rate fell 6% in 2024. What do you attribute that change to?
I think there's a couple things. As a service, we've been very focused on, violent crimes. So things like gang violence, youth violence, domestic violence. These are all things that we see within the community that drive a lot of our violent crime indicators. So we developed some strategies around those. Took some very focused approaches on, those domestic violence strategies where we see, communities within Edmonton that haven't had support or don't feel comfortable reporting domestic violence, really working intentionally with them to try to get that information and work with them. The gangs, we know we have a gun issue in the city, so very focused work around intervention with gang members, focusing on, gun investigations, driving down some of those stats around shootings. And then lastly, youth crime. Like we see in most municipalities, a real increase in youth violence across Canada. So we've developed some programs. We have a youth strategy that includes like a gang mentoring program. We have a youth diversion program. We also have some mental health supports directly focused on youth. So really focusing on some of those groups that are, we saw driving violence indicators in the city. So I think we see within some of those kind of groups of people, as well as those crime types, a real concerted effort to push those down. But that doesn't, like you said when you intro, doesn't tell the whole story. Mm-hmm. We see also significant increases in our disorder-related events. So disorder that we see on the street, people using open-air drug use, what may have termed a long time ago, vagrancy, people hanging out, encampments. Mm-hmm. And so those create a perception of unsafety. So there's this conflated issue of what people see on the street, they relate that to crime, and then they don't feel comfortable. We've, over the last year, worked specifically with our city partners and the transit peace officers to really focus on safety in transit. And we can see that when we're working there with them together, we actually drive down crime.
Reports of drug possession crimes continue to tick up year over year. What's driving that trend?
I think there's a couple things. Edmonton, is a gateway to the north. It works two ways. One is that this becomes a bit of a conduit for drugs to the northern communities. The second is we are a bit of a feeder system for the northern community. So if somebody's in a northern community needs support, whether it's medical or they come in through the justice system, they end up in Edmonton at some point, right? So we have this problem with people coming to the city and not being reconnected to their community, and then they find themselves on the street, and then the availability of drugs is there, and we see that. Like one of the stats we've been tracking, and it's not unknown, is that we're seeing an increase in opiate deaths in the city. So we also have like a toxic drug supply. Right? And that is concerning. So we've got to look at what are the health avenues, like what do we do from a health perspective to get people support? How do we start to suppress some of this open-air drug use? I think that's important because we're at a point where the drugs are so lethal, we just can't sit by and watch people use them. And then disrupting that flow of drugs into the area. Is it coming in? Is it being produced here? So looking at all those different things and figuring out what that looks like for us. So.
Mm-hmm. Do possession arrests translate to safer streets in the long run?
Yeah, and I can address that. We only charged, I think last year, 14 people with simple possession of drugs, right? Okay. We very rarely just arrest and charge drug users for the possession of drugs. It's just putting them into the criminal justice system. That's a last resort issue. We try to work with them differently. So we'll try to work at them, getting them to our navigation center, getting them the supports they need, getting them to a sober center or whatever. And there's some effort in the city to start to build out some of those models because there is such a prevalent open-air drug use and addicted problem within some of the community on the street. So we don't really approach it from a justice angle. We try to look at it as how do we get the drugs out of there? How do we remove that individual from whatever it is they're doing and get them the supports they need? And frankly, the justice system doesn't want to see them. They don't want to prosecute someone just for, simple possession of drugs when there are so many other serious things that they could be, prosecuting in the court system.
Something that's not in the latest statistics, but we know from previous stats reports, is that police use of force has increased in 2024. Yep. What can police do to address that?
We're always reviewing our use of force. So there's a couple things. Whenever we have a use of force incident on the street, it's reviewed. It's reviewed at the street level by the supervisors. There's a report submitted. We actually have an analysis that occurs behind the scenes to kind of look at trends. So if we see that there's a certain incident that's driving use of force or certain types of use of force that's being used more, we start to assess what are we doing, what are we training. Those reports actually come to Chiefs Committee to review as well, and we also report to the Commission, right? So we recognize always the risk of using force, right? From is it appropriate? Is it the right thing to do? I would add on though that our members are being we're seeing higher levels of attacks on our members than we've seen in the past. And this again isn't isn't just restricted to the Edmonton Police Service. Talking with other peers across from Calgary as well as the RCMP, their members are subject to more violence and their members being attacked, which also ultimately results in use of force. We also see that when we talk about some of these violent things, even though our crime severity index is down and our violence is down, the level of violence in the calls that remains is escalating. Right? So where we have less violent calls, the violence that's occurring within those calls that remain is more severe, which then again, puts us in a bit of an awkward place where our level of force or our presence increases. We know that we had a very visible officer-involved shooting like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, right? And the fire truck incident, I think I'll refer to it, and it was all over social media, went viral very quickly. Yeah. When you look at the root cause of that incident, that individual was imminently going to cause harm to another person, and our member had to take action, right? So again, it's those things that are occurring in the community that force us into those, kind of use of force incidents. And one of the things that we really focus on, though, is like, how do we de-escalate? So we're bringing in a new de-escalation training, new kind of, training that our members from a verbal perspective, how can they do other things before they get to that use of force? But oftentimes these things are so quick and they happen so quickly, our members are forced to use force. So.